Productivity, Albanese versus Lowe. Who gets it? Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Insights brought to you by Ainslie Bullion and the Gold and Silver Standard. Today, welcome back Alex, who's been looking at all things productivity today, especially the shortfall in Australian productivity gains that are needed to keep us on track to compete in a very challenging international environment. But really, it's quite important to maintain our quite high standards of living that we have. So it's a lot. There's a deep dive here. There's a lot of concepts to unpack. How are you going today, Alex?
I'm going very well. How are you going today?
I'm going very well as well. I know we were having a little bit of a discussion before this, and I know this was one that really got under your skin. But let's start at the beginning of this conversation. What was Phillip Lowe, who's the head of the was the head of the RBA, who's now stepped down from the, or I think he's finished his tenure, if I got that correctly, and wrapping up, he had his sort of final speech. What was he talking about? And what was the link between inflation and productivity specifically that he was talking about that's relevant for us today?
So, as you know, I've had a pretty average computer for quite some time. So I bought a new computer and thought it was pretty appropriate that we talk about productivity today, because it's taken me less than 10 minutes to open my computer today, which was a big win. Yeah. So I thought, looking at what's going on in productivity at the moment, and then I saw an article last night where Albanese got up in front of the AIG group and spoke about what he saw productivity. And I just thought I'd do a quick comparison with what Lowe is looking at and what Albanese is looking at. Now, Lowe has finished up as RBA governor and has now had the opportunity to talk to whatever he wants to talk about. And this has given him a great chance to jump in and say what he sees the biggest challenges going forward in Australia. Mm. Now, in the last year, we've had a decline in productivity, and we're now back to December 2019 levels. So in order to improve standards of living, you need to increase output per person. Yep. So that's measured by productivity. So if we are dropping, it means that output per person is lowering, and it means that that our standard of living per person should be dropping equivalently. So what Lowe has come up and said is, he said, if we continue to go down this path where productivity keeps decreasing, our inflation will increase because goods become more costly, because I'm now producing less. I now have less money myself or as a business to spend on something. So that means that the inflation for those goods rise. So Phillip Lowe has come out and said, basically, bad government policy is driving bad productivity, and they have policies to improve this, and they are choosing not to do it, or they're ignoring it. So it was a pretty timely swipe at the government. And, that's he just cannot in any more words say that migration policy, productivity policy are just going to keep driving inflation up unless they are improved.
So it's always very interesting to listen to someone like Phillip Lowe in this situation, because, as you pointed out, he can say what he wants because he's out the door. So it's that last day of work, you get to say what you really think. And what he said there, from how you've described that, makes a lot of sense. I can sort of understand that. So let's contrast that, shall we, with what our illustrious leader, Anthony Albanese, had to say about what was going on there. Can you maybe give us his side of how he thinks the government should be approaching the issue?
Well, I'd just like to read his words, and I'd just like everyone to contemplate his words, because as a business owner myself, I contemplated the words and I struggled. So the answer is not a matter of cutting pay and conditions or replacing workers with technology. The answer is boosting productivity by finding new ways for our people and businesses to get the most out of technology. All right, so great words. Apparently technology and workers' pay unrelated to productivity. Interesting. I believe people should be paid appropriately. I believe that wages should go up. But the only way that happens is with use of technology. Now, the world is an economic ecosystem. There is only so much output. There is only so much input. You cannot create infinite demand by just putting technology in a company and keeping the same people. If I was to invest in technology, say in a manufacturing plant, and I have a machine that makes widgets, and my competition has a machine that makes widgets, and the world needs 100 widgets. Now I put technology in and I don't fire anyone. So I've paid money for technology and I've now got to pay for the technology. The world only needs 100 widgets. Well, my competition is actually now more competitive than me because I invested in technology that I have to pay for and I haven't fired anyone. So the only way that I think this makes sense is more from the government's point of view, where they continue to spend money on technology, not look to people. So, keep the same number of people, still give them pay rises, invest in technology, and just, the deficits just run bigger and bigger. Because I can't see it working in the economy for businesses.
That's a really good point. And this is the issue that should be front and center in any of these discussions, is that the government can do that, and it can make sense if you're a bureaucrat living in the world of government spending where the money just magically appears. But the reality, if you're trying to run a business, that's not the reality. That doesn't make any economic sense. So that's a big problem. And I suppose that's the next question I'd really like to ask is, how does this work with these deficits? Because it seems like there's just such a big gap between that reality and the perspective of someone like the Prime Minister putting out there saying, well, no, businesses can just run the same way we run a government, where you just have this money so you can just spend it on both and everyone can be happy. So more importantly, how should this be run to increase productivity?
Unfortunately, technology replaces people. I mean, look at manufacturing, back post-war, I think it was 30-40% of people were employed in manufacturing. Now we're under 10%. Because there's robots, because there's technology to get more out per person. And it's the only way that's going to drive it. Now, AI is going to do the same to the service sector. Yep. So there is not infinite output and there is not infinite, demand. So it just doesn't work this way. New jobs are going to have to be created. New industries have to be created. But you buy technology, you use technology, you unfortunately generally lose wages and people. Now, the government, with these increasing deficits we keep seeing, I don't think any government in the world, I mean, particularly the US, Australia is doing a stellar job compared to some of its peers overseas. These deficits are growing because maybe this is their belief. Maybe it is productivity will just continue to grow and we'll just invest in technology and people and not look for anything else. Now, I looked at the example for, a refinery in Australia.
I love that example, by the way, because that brings some of this really home when you put it through what processes are involved for an actual business. So, yeah, if you could go through that example, that'd be great.
Yeah, so just a refinery in Australia, when you've got chemicals on site, or you need the EPA licenses to operate a facility, you need to keep information. So, for example, at a refinery, just chemicals. So this is not everything else that's compliant. You've got to be compliant on just chemicals. So you need MSDSs, a list of what chemicals are held on site. You get asked that same information by 6-7 different government departments, the local council, the fire brigade, the EPA, the NPI, which is the pollution inventory that you've got to do once a year. The list is huge and it just keeps going. And just using technology as an example to save some costs for the business, why couldn't you just write it down one place and every single government department gets it from the same one? But instead, you have 7 different people whose jobs are in 7 different government agencies are to ask you exactly the same thing and do something else with the information. It is, insanity what's going on. And what it's actually doing is it's taking away the ability of any companies to start. So, everyone talks, who was it that just tried to take over Suncorp? Was it ANZ? That just got okay. So I think ANZ was trying to take over Suncorp. I'll have to look it up. But the ACCC has knocked it on its head now because we want more competition in Australia. You want more competition in Australia, but the government is creating higher and higher barriers to entry as you need more and more people within a business just to comply with 7 different government agencies just for the chemicals you hold on site. So, these companies keep merging, which creates huge barriers to entry on its own, but the government's creating even greater ones on the other side. Now, less businesses, more government departments, less ability of anyone to come into the market, less innovation, less drive for productivity. So, it's just creating a huge conundrum, which ultimately Lowe identified fairly correctly and said the government has policies to fix this, and the government probably is where it needs to start.
There's a lot in there that you've just said, and it really strikes home to me, that understanding of how difficult it is if you want to start something new and you've got that entrepreneurial spirit. You might even have the capital to back yourself, but you have to get to such a scale that you can handle all of that bureaucracy and all of that red tape. I mean, that to me hits the nail on the head around the issue around productivity, because you can't even get through the gates. You can't even get started if you don't have a scale of such size that it can meet all of your obligations. So maybe to wrap up, can you give us, because there's a lot there. You've covered a lot of the issues that were really that you've identified, sort of on the back of what Lowe's identified. But how do we solve this? Like, what's your sort of, synthesizing it all down? How do we solve this productivity conundrum that you mentioned here in Australia? How do we do that?
Look, businesses in Australia are going to struggle to get into this market unless there's government incentive or less government red tape. There isn't much more you can say that can be done by the business community. The business community doesn't invest because, we're changing to green energy. Okay, well, what does that look like? I'd like to invest in green energy. Oh, well, we've got to reduce by 30% by 2030, but we don't know what that looks like. All right, so I won't invest in that. And you've got the Prime Minister coming up and saying, right, invest in technology, don't fire people, increase your productivity. Right, so how? So they don't invest in robotics and other things that makes them, because they don't think they can fight. They're being encouraged not to fire people, but, not to look for optimal output within their organisation, because it's almost discouraged. So it starts with policy, it ends with policy, but it probably needs some understanding as to exactly what they are asking companies to do. And companies need to be very clear so they can invest in the future.
And I love that answer that starts with policy and ends with policy, particularly to say we need the smarts at the top. We need good leadership on this so that businesses feel that they're supported to be able to solve. So you're saying, if I'm interpreting that correctly, you're effectively saying we don't have a problem with businesses solving productivity. They will naturally do it. We have a policy problem that's standing in the way of businesses naturally doing it. Would you say that that's fair?
Policy and just clear direction.
Yep.
Just this is what we are doing with energy. This is what we are doing with red tape. This is what we are doing with monopolies. Yep. Just enable people to compete and be clear. And that's it.
and the rest solves itself.
Wow.
Well, Alex, as always, solved all the world's problems today. We just need people to listen. So thank you for that.
Always fun. You know what? The horror of that hard thing is I'm in business, and the government in some ways makes it easier for me to stay in business because it's harder for my competitors to join.
Yes.
To join. And so, to all the entrepreneurs that are out there, like, they're stymied, and it's really disappointing because that's what everyone needs to grow productivity, grow innovation, and be a better country.
Yeah, and that's a really valid point, because it's not even in your best interest as a business that's got to that scale. But you can see the writing on the wall. It's in everyone's best interest that we have a better standard of living, and this is where it all comes from.
It is where it all comes from.
That's fantastic. Thanks everyone for watching. Remember, reach out with any questions or comments on social platforms. That's us for today. We'll be back tomorrow with Branko to discuss all things markets and metals. Until then, have a great rest of the day, everyone.